quick demonstration on how to install a clutch kit on your RZR XP Turbo. Same method goes for the 16, 17 models. On this one we've already removed the clutch cover bolts and we've removed the hose clamp and the clutch inlet there. So we're going to pop the clutch cover off. The easiest way to do this, as long as the machine isn't lowered or anything like that, is to pop it off and pull it right out the bottom. So that'll push right out the bottom of the machine, real easy like that. Your cover's off. And that's after we removed all the 8mm bolts from around the outside. Make sure those are removed. First thing you want to do is remove your belt. This belt's shot, this secondary is actually shot. We're going to replace this one, but we're going to demonstrate on it anyways. So take your belt removal tool. This is in your toolkit. Little L-shaped tool that threads into here. And just thread this in and it'll eventually start pushing the two halves of the clutch open and apart from each other. This is a crucial step that you want to make sure you remove the belt first. Alright. Screw that in until it's almost coming in contact with the secondary bolt here. You can then pull up on the belt and roll it out just like that. Out of the primary, roll it around, and your belt's removed. This one's shot. Okay. So now we can unthread our belt tool for the time being. Make sure you unthread this, it's a necessary step. You do not want to leave it in. And I'll show you why in just a second. Grab a 15mm. I use an impact, a lot easier. Hold the clutch. Pop that off. Make sure you keep your washers in order. That's very important. Larger washer goes on first. Now we've got a snap ring on here. Polaris actually uses a snap ring to set your belt deflection. So the clutch can only come out so far. That way it's set for everything. They don't use any washers. Kind of a different way of doing it, but that's how they do it. These are extremely easy to mess up. And the reason a lot of people mess them up is they try to take the secondary off with the belt on or with the belt removal tool in. What that's doing is shoving the secondary over, and it's putting pressure on this clip. And if there's pressure on it, it's hard to get it off because it's meant to not come off when there's pressure on it. So you need to slide this back, make sure this is nice and loose. That way you have no pressure on that C-clip. And remove the clip, being very careful. Take note of which way this washer goes as it's indented so that it can ride over the clip. And that also helps hold the clip in. And then we can pull this side of the sheave off. And our other side, which actually holds our helix and the spring that we're going to replace. Okay, I like to use impact with a nice long extension. This makes this a lot easier. Light impact is all you need, or do it by hand as well. We're just going to remove these 6 bolts. Try to remove them somewhat evenly. And there's light spring pressure under here, not a lot. And like I said, make sure you just take that cover off evenly. It does have a bushing inside of it, so if it comes off really crooked, you could potentially damage the bushing. So as evenly as possible. Very easy step to do. Now you can actually slide your clutch all the way forward, and that'll expose your weights. Alright, so you want to turn your clutch so that you can get to your first weight here. Using a 3/8 inch, I recommend a quarter drive. It just fits a lot nicer in there. Try to use a 3/8 drive. They're a little bit bigger socket a lot of times, and it won't actually fit in the groove that it's supposed to go into here. So quarter drive, 1/8" Allen wrench, and we're just going to crack this loose. They're locking nuts, so there's really no reason to ever over torque them or anything. Once they're seated, they're seated. So just go ahead and remove this weight. Our nut is out, and our pin is coming out here. Sometimes you have to work the pin out a little bit. Until we remove our weight. So once your one weight is removed, you'll want to repeat the process for all 3 weights. Honestly, easier to remove one and insert your Aftermarket Assassins weight into this one, then move on to the next one. That way you're not rotating the clutch and the whole motor a bunch of times. You're only doing it 3 times and not 6 times. So you want to make sure you're properly set up. Your setup guideline will give you a great source of information. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us, let us know. Email, phone, whatever you need to do, and we'll make sure you get your clutch set up correctly. But that setup guideline is dialed in really, really well. Okay, our next step is to remove the spring from your secondary clutch. Pretty easy. This is under spring pressure. You need to remove these 3 Torx bolts. They're T30 bolts. It is under spring pressure, so you have to use a compression tool, or you can use a press, something to hold that down that's not going to allow it to slide off, because you will have to release it slowly, as you'll see. This is a great spring compressor here. Once it seats, that's all you need to do, very lightly, and then come in here. I use a small impact. You can use whatever you'd like to remove these T30 Torx screws. Okay, now if those are removed, you can actually release pressure. And there you are. Remove the holder. There's your helix below it. Here's your factory, it's actually a limiter. A lot of people will cut this down. I usually do cut this in half. That way it allows the clutch to shift out a little bit further. Good for a little bit of speed, and just so you know that your clutch isn't being limited by this factor. So this one already has a spring in it. Not the factory spring will be black. But basically, undo that process. Put your spring in. Make sure you don't cut this down too much because it does center the spring. Put your helix down and sort of line up your 3 bolt holes. Center this up. And just slowly walk this down, making sure everything stays as centered as possible. And you want to make sure that your V's here are going into the slots they should, and you're not hitting on the sliders on the inside of the clutch. Another good note that I forgot to mention when I was in this one, this clutch is junk anyways, but you want to make sure that those sliders are okay. If they're not flat spotted way off, if they are, you probably want to replace them. If your clutch has over 600-700 miles, even if it has 500 miles, it's probably a good idea to replace those. Your primary clutch as well, if it's got the sliders that go in there, not the actual metal sliders, but the bushing part of it that goes in there. Those are a good thing to replace while you're doing this clutch kit. Very easy to do, to pull those out and replace them. Not a bad idea if you have a bunch of miles on your machine. So this one's staying pretty centered. This side over here is not. Want to make sure they've got these little centering tabs on them. Make sure that you this nice and centered. Otherwise, they'll be fighting. And that should center up pretty nicely. And then we basically push until we can find a bolt hole to put these in. And we can lightly thread that one in. Go to our next one. This one lines up pretty good too. And the third one looks like it's right on also. Sometimes you might have to move this whole assembly. It will move a little bit inside of there to get everything to line up. Kicker T30 and tighten these up again. Again, this is a very light impact. Make sure you torque them to spec. We're going to go ahead and throw this secondary on. I recommend that you put the machine in gear for the time being. Go ahead and throw it in high. Throw the machine in high. That helps get this piece on. It will be a little off-centered, so it centers that helix. Not an issue. And easily goes on like that. Make sure it's all the way bottomed out. You can kind of feel it. Most people want to put their belt on at this step. Very important not to put your belt on, because what that does is it pushes the movable sheave over and it's very hard to get your clip on again. So make sure you don't put your belt on. Make sure you do that last with your belt removal tool. Makes life a lot easier. You mess up a lot less clips. So we'll go ahead and put our other sheave on here. Install this washer. And grab our snap ring pliers, and we'll go ahead and make sure that's seated. That looks perfect. Then grab our bolt, and this one washer you see actually fits over the shaft, so make sure that does get into place. You can do that kind of after you thread it in. You'll thread it in, it'll be kind of loose, but make sure that does center itself and seat in the shaft. That kind of sandwiches that clip in. And we'll go ahead and tighten that up. If you want to torque that again, don't do as I do. Make sure you get a torque wrench on that, torque it to the right amount. Here, slide your belt over the primary clutch. Then you can go ahead and put your clutch cover back on. You can bring it up through the bottom just as you took it off. That should go on easily. Make sure it's perfectly seated on there, no gaps. Tighten all the bolts for the clutch cover. If it's your first time putting the clutch kit in, if you haven't done any adjustments, if you have a clean place to run it where your clutches aren't going to get all dirty, you can leave the clutch cover off. That's usually what I do. Leave the clutch cover off, run the clutch kit, make sure it is what it is, your peak RPM matches what's on your sheet. If it doesn't, then we need to make some adjustments, and it's a lot easier to do if you don't have the cover on. But make sure you don't go in any really sandy stuff, really dirty stuff. It can destroy your clutches pretty easily. So make sure you test and make sure your RPM's good, because that really depends on where your power's at. Clutching makes a huge difference on these. When you're adding this much horsepower with the tunes that we do, you really can't do it on stock clutching. You're just going to be over revving, and you're not going to be properly transferring that power to the wheels. Basically, it's like adding in a manual transmission a ton of horsepower. You can kind of skip third gear, or whatever gear is your short gear. You can kind of skip that. that's kind of what we're doing here. We're shifting it faster because we have more power to shift it faster. We can get away with that going into the next gear quicker, and we're also making it with the springs back shift quicker, so that way when you get out of the throttle, it's more responsive. That also puts a little bit more side pressure on the belt and helps keep it cooler. And this really helps belt life, performance, and longevity of your clutches. So I think you really enjoy our clutch kits. They work really, really well for the XP Turbo and many other RZR models. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know.